So let me ask you straight off, what do you think about this withdrawal program and the idea that the president having to weigh a lot of different concerns before he makes a final decision?
Well, I think clearly there's been tremendous pressure, as it was pointed out in the program earlier, both from the public, from Congress, to either justify why we need to be there or to start this this drawback. And I think that this is partly in response to that pressure. And I think if there was a justifiable reason for being there, I'm not so sure the president has articulated that clearly enough. And so the only alternative is to embark on this kind of pullout.
You know, there are a lot of people who are saying, well, Osama bin Laden is dead. And originally, that's what people thought we were going back into Afghanistan for, and that's why the president stepped up operations there. What is the mission now going forward, now that bin Laden's gone?
So the question is, what's the mission, and where does this president, where does this White House stand on Libya, where do they stand on Afghanistan? I mean, what are we doing? Are we in or are we out? What's the unofficial Marine Corps motto, you know, no better friend, no worse enemy, which is what I think the United States used to be. We're neither now. We're waffling in the middle. I'll guess that we're going to be pulling out of Afghanistan slowly, and you got to wonder why we went in the first place if we're going to be pulling out now.
The problem, and I think the challenge for this White House, is that there doesn't seem to be any coherent foreign policy. There's no doctrine to follow that should provide guidance for any of our foreign policy decisions. And I think that certainly circumstances are very different in different, parts of the world in which we may need to pay attention. But there should be some consistent theory or philosophy guiding this White House in terms of its foreign policy decisions, and at the moment it's all over the map. So it's difficult to give the public any clear idea of where this president wants to go with respect to foreign policy. During the Bush administration, even if you hated Bush's policies on foreign affairs, you still knew what the overall mission was. There was an overarching theme. There was a so-called doctrine. I'm not so sure we have a doctrine right now for the Obama administration.
I agree, and you're right. I hated Bush's, all of his policies, hated them all. But I was crystal clear on where he stood. This president said, the president that I support makes contradictory statements almost about every place that we are in the world right now. It's very, very difficult to ascertain what our position is.
What about the efforts of Congress right now to see, what can be done about the whole issue of whether or not we can still engage in operations, not only, well, Afghanistan's one issue, but also Libya, we're focused. The fact that, we're talking, when you point out about military operations, you don't have a consistent policy. You're saying, what about what's happening on Capitol Hill regarding that issue?
Well, I think, for starters, war powers has always been contentious. The Constitution's unclear about this, and so presidents and Congress have grappled with this issue for a very, very long time, and that's what we're seeing unfold right now. I think Congress wants to make sure it retains at least some say in foreign policy decisions, at the very least, because they have to fund these things, right? The Constitution is very clear about funding. But at the same time, I think they want to make sure that they could be a check on the White House's ability to intervene almost unilaterally where it chooses to do so. And I think that part of that is just to act as a check and to respect the political process that should incorporate some voice from lawmakers in Congress.
Yeah, I guess the problem is with, and you're right, because everybody who's ever had to wrestle with this issue, it's the same thing always. It's the debate of what exactly, what is the clear definition of what that act is for. I mean, but when President Obama, when you bring up Libya and you say war, what war?
Right.
Like, that doesn't have any credibility. We didn't, we're not doing what we said we went there to do. I'm not opposed to being there, but let's say what we're doing there.
Right, and do it right. And I think it fails the, what did Boehner call it, the straight-face test or something. Anyone who you explain what we're actually doing there, you give them the facts, then they clearly think that's hostilities, right? So to make an argument that this is not incidents of hostility, I think it just is a smack in the face of anyone who could reasonably look at this and judge for themselves whether these are hostilities.
Yeah, I think Boehner's comments also are probably going to be one of, I think, the keys for the Republican candidate for president is, will they be able to pass that test? Because that is, I did not like George Bush. I talked about it for years on air, but I clearly knew where he stood. I think that people are going to want to know that from the Republican candidate, whoever that might be.
Right, and not only that, but this is something that I believe that Senator Obama, and even before he was a senator, he would have had a problem with any president doing this without congressional sanction.
So
I think he would have
why
spoken
is it a
against
disconnect
it.
there? And what's going on, you think, in his administration where it is coming across as though he doesn't have a real clear vision as to how to move forward?
Well, he does. One, he doesn't. I mean, there's a big disconnect.
There is a disconnect.
Sitting in a room with regular old people like me and military people, we don't get each other.
Well, it's interesting. This is coming from an Obama supporter, folks. So that's why I find it very interesting.
Yeah, but this is not uncommon. If you look at the polls out there, the
right,
public,
no, I agree with
including Democrats,
right.
are very unhappy with this president.
They are.
Increasingly so on the on foreign policy issues, which is the one area where Obama did quite well relative to the economy and jobs in other areas. And this is what you're hearing from Democrats as well as independents.
You know,
and
unfortunately,
and so that's a big problem for this president.
And that's true.
You've got a candidate like Huntsman.
But when you're talking about things in terms of like the message is key, and the fact that they are supposedly masters at communication and being able to control the spin on it, so to speak. Why is this continually seeming to come out as though this administration takes 2 steps forward and 3 steps back?
Consensus. Everything is consensus. We want to see what everybody's thinking, how everybody's feeling. Correct me if I'm wrong, either of you. I believe the only place where we didn't sit around and wait for consensus was Bin Laden. He made a decision. We went in, we got him, and we left.
And that's arguably the major foreign policy success of this administration. Is the one time he was actually decisive and did the job well.